The Cheyenne, an Algonquin-speaking tribe, were closely associated with the Arapaho and Gravant and had looser ties with the Lakota Sioux. As one of the most significant tribes of the plains, they primarily roamed and hunted across the hills and prairies near the Missouri and Red Rivers. Originally, the Cheyenne settled near the Great Lakes in Minnesota and along the Missouri River, living in log houses covered with earth. They practiced farming and pottery in their permanent villages. However, during the late 1600s, they began to migrate westward, likely due to increasing competition and conflicts with other native nations. The Cheyenne, who roamed from Montana to Oklahoma to Colorado, eventually unified into one tribe by the early 19th century under the growing pressure from U.S. military forces and the influx of settlers. Cheyenne warriors were structured into societies or orders, each with a fraternal, military, and spiritual nature. These societies, each with its unique songs and rituals, trace their origins to mythical beings, heroes, or medicine men. Among these groups, the Dog Soldiers stood out as the most prominent. Traditionally, Cheyenne governance was divided between two key groups: the Council of 44, which was composed of elder chiefs responsible for daily governance, and a set of military societies that enforced discipline and provided military leadership. Among these societies were the Fox, Elk, Shield, Bowstring Men, Dog Warriors, and Contrary Warrior societies. The Dog Soldiers were the most powerful and militant of the Cheyenne's 6 military societies and rose to prominence during the 19th century Native resistance against American encroachment. By around 1830, the entire Massiskoda Cheyenne band had joined the Dog Soldiers, making it the largest and most aggressive warrior society within the tribe. The Dog Soldiers, along with members of other military societies, were tasked with law enforcement and overseeing the tribal buffalo hunt. They ensured that hunting rules were followed and that every hunter had an equal chance. The Dog Soldiers' influence extended beyond the tribe. They became a significant political force, especially as violent confrontations with settlers became more frequent. They staunchly opposed the signing of treaties with the U.S. government. By 1840, the Dog Soldiers had gained such influence that Cheyenne chiefs entrusted them with deciding whether to make peace with the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache after a devastating battle with these tribes in 1838. The peace forged by the Dog Soldiers was never broken. However, the battle with the Pawnee in 1852 was a severe loss for the Cheyenne, prompting those who had lost loved ones to present gifts to the Dog Soldiers, urging them to seek revenge. The Dog Soldiers launched a campaign against the Pawnee but were forced to retreat after encountering a group of Potawatomi armed with firearms. The discovery of gold in the Rocky Mountains during the 1850s sparked the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, bringing an influx of settlers and escalating tensions between native nations and the U.S. government. The U.S. pressured tribal leaders to sign treaties that reduced native territories, angering the Cheyenne, Sioux, and Arapaho. In 1860, the Dog Soldiers refused to sign a treaty proposed by the Commissioner of Indian Affairs at Bent's Fort on the upper Arkansas River, vowing never to settle on a reservation. The Dog Soldiers and other warriors began raiding along the Platte River, targeting wagon trains, mining camps, and stagecoach lines, especially during the Civil War when military presence in the area was reduced. This sparked the Colorado War of 1863 to 1865. As violence escalated between native nations and miners, Territorial Governor John Evans sent Colonel John Chivington to suppress the native resistance. In the spring of 1864, while the Civil War raged in the East, Chivington led a campaign against the Cheyenne and their allies, attacking all natives and destroying their villages. The Cheyenne, along with the Arapaho, Sioux, Comanche, and Kiowa in Colorado and Kansas, took up arms in defense. After a summer of sporadic raids and skirmishes, some Cheyenne and Arapaho were ready for peace. They met with Evans and Chivington at Camp Weld near Denver on September 28, 1864. Though no treaties were signed, the natives believed that by reporting and camping near army posts, they were declaring peace and seeking sanctuary. Cheyenne Chief Black Kettle, along with about 550 Cheyenne and Arapaho, moved south to set up camp on Sand Creek under the promised protection of Fort Leon. However, the Dog Soldiers, who opposed the peace agreement, moved north to join the Sioux. Despite knowing that the natives had surrendered, Chivington led his 700 troops, many of whom were intoxicated, to Sand Creek, surrounding the village with 4 howitzers. Black Kettle, trusting in the promises of peace, raised an American flag and a white flag of surrender over his lodge. Ignoring these symbols of peace, Chivington ordered the attack. Cannons and rifles rained down on the camp as the natives scattered in terror. The soldiers charged, mercilessly hunting down men, women, and children. A few warriors managed to fight back, allowing some of the camp's inhabitants to escape across the creek. One soldier, Silas Soule, a Massachusetts abolitionist, refused to follow Chivington's orders, preventing his cavalry company from firing into the fleeing crowd. In the massacre, 150 natives were killed, most of them elderly men, women, and children. The cavalry, in contrast, lost only 9 or 10 men, with about 3 dozen wounded. Chief Black Kettle and his wife managed to escape despite her being shot multiple times. The survivors, many of them wounded, sought refuge in the camp of the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers, who had remained opposed to the peace treaty at the Smoky Hill River. Many native warriors joined the ranks of the Dog Soldiers, recognizing that no meaningful negotiations could be made with the U.S., and instead turned to war. The Sand Creek Massacre is often pointed to as a significant catalyst for the Battle of Little Bighorn, as it drove many Cheyenne warriors to dedicate their lives to resisting U.S. forces. After Sand Creek, a unified force of Cheyenne Dog Soldiers, Sioux, and Arapaho warriors formed a war party with the intent to raid the Emigrant Road near the Platte Bridge, where a stockade known as Camp Dodge had been established. This war party, estimated to number around 3,000, launched attacks on Julesburg and Camp Rankin, killing 14 soldiers and 4 armed civilians while sustaining minimal losses themselves. Following this, they embarked on a major raid along the South Platte River Valley. The Cheyenne raided west of Julesburg, the northern Arapaho struck near Julesburg, and the Sioux targeted the east, destroying numerous ranches and stagecoach stations across a 93-mile stretch of the river valley. They also captured a large herd of cattle. Near Valley Station, the Cheyenne engaged in a minor skirmish without suffering any casualties. During this raid, they encountered a group of 9 former soldiers, whom they killed, discovering in their luggage 2 Cheyenne scalps from the Sand Creek Massacre. The native force then continued north toward the Powder River country of Wyoming to join their kin. The Sioux led the way, being most familiar with the land. Further to the north, in Montana's Yellowstone River Valley, Sioux warriors killed a colonel named Smith and later ambushed and killed 11 men near Fort Benton on the Missouri River. Nearly every day in June and early July, isolated outposts, stagecoach stations, and wagon trains were attacked, leading to more casualties among soldiers and civilians. In the ensuing months, native warriors frequently raided wagon trains and military posts along the Oregon Trail in Wyoming. In the summer of 1865, they launched a large-scale offensive during the Battle of Platte Bridge. Out of the 150 soldiers stationed there, 29 were killed and 10 seriously wounded, while the natives lost 8 of their own. The Dog Soldiers took on the role of policing the area during this expedition, successfully preventing the troops from discovering their presence. The successful execution of the native strategy in this battle is attributed to Roman Nose, a Cheyenne war chief. In 1865, another effort was made to convene a council and establish a treaty with the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache. The commission met with these tribes on the Arkansas River, setting aside reservations in the southern region. Most of the Cheyenne accepted this treaty as binding, but the Dog Soldiers refused to comply, despite 2 attempts to persuade them to leave lands they had never ceded to the U.S. government. When General Hancock launched an attack, the Cheyenne, as was their custom, managed to escape, leaving their village to be burned. Over the course of 4 months of active campaigning, General Hancock, leading a force of 1,400 men, including cavalry, artillery, and infantry, managed to kill only 2 hostile natives. Similarly, General George Custer's summer campaign along the Republican and Smoky Hill rivers failed to subdue the natives, prompting the Cheyenne to come in for the Medicine Lodge Treaty. However, with Fort Reno, Fort Phil Kearny, and Fort Smith being established along the Powder River Road to Montana, which cut through the last remaining hunting grounds of the tribe, the treaty ultimately amounted to nothing. The natives could not remain passive as their primary food source, the buffalo, was being systematically wiped out. In 1868, the Battle of Beecher Island, one of the most brutal confrontations between the U.S. and Plains natives in the American West, took place along the Arikari River, then considered part of the North Fork of the Republican River near present-day Ray, Colorado. For months, native warriors had been attacking settlers and travelers in western Nebraska and Kansas. Soldiers sent to pursue them repeatedly arrived after the natives had already moved on. Colonel George A. Forsyth then raised a company of 50 frontiersmen, many of whom had lost loved ones to native attacks. On September 17, 1868, a large force of Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux warriors launched an assault. After a few volleys of fire, the native line broke. Roman Nose, a Cheyenne chief, was killed, leading the natives to retreat. The soldiers also retreated to a sandbar in the middle of the Arikari River, taking cover behind their dead horses. The battle then shifted to a siege. Major Forsyth sent scouts on a 75-mile journey to Fort Wallace, Kansas, for reinforcements. While many of the scouts were killed by the natives, some eventually reached their destination. The native strategy was to starve out the soldiers, who, having lost their pack mules and provisions at the beginning of the battle, were left with only river water and a dead horse. The soldiers endured a week of this, drinking river water and eating horse meat. Reinforcements finally arrived on the morning of September 25th, bringing relief to the besieged soldiers. Upon seeing the reinforcements, the natives dispersed. The U.S. lost 6 soldiers, with 15 wounded. The exact number of native casualties is unclear, but estimates range from 10 to 30. The Dog Soldiers later participated in the Second Battle of Adobe Walls. Early in the morning of June 27, 1874, a combined force of approximately 700 Comanche, Cheyenne, Kiowa, and Arapaho warriors, led by Comanche Chief Quanah Parker and Isatai, attacked a buffalo camp. The hunters took refuge in 2 stores and a saloon. Despite being outnumbered, with only 28 buffalo hunters present, their superior weaponry repelled the native assault. After 4 days of intense fighting, about 100 men arrived to reinforce the post, prompting the natives to retreat. Estimates of native losses vary, with as many as 30 warriors killed, including many others wounded, among them Parker. In 1876, many Dog Soldiers were present at the Battle of Little Bighorn, a decisive conflict between Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors in the U.S. Army. The natives, led by prominent war leaders such as Crazy Horse, Chief Gall, Brave Bear, American Horse, and 2 Moons, and inspired by the visions of Sitting Bull, achieved a resounding victory. However, during the winter following Little Bighorn, Dull Knife, a Cheyenne war chief, and his people camped along the headwaters of the Powder River in Wyoming, where they were targeted by the Army's winter campaign for retribution. In November, General Ronald Mackenzie's expeditionary force discovered the village and launched an attack. Dull Knife lost many of his people, and the Cheyenne were forced to relocate. It is believed that the Dog Soldiers were present during the capture of Dull Knife's village, marking a significant blow as the Army continued its efforts to force the Cheyenne into submission. The government forcibly relocated the Northern Cheyenne to the Indian Territory, aiming to place the entire tribe on a single reservation. However, the climate of Oklahoma proved harsh and unforgiving for the Cheyenne from Montana, leading to many deaths. Medical supplies were scarce, and rations were insufficient. Within a year, the Northern Cheyenne grew so dissatisfied with their new conditions that some decided to fight their way back north. Tanglehair, the head chief of the Dog Soldiers, was among those who fled, but Little Wolf was the true leader of the expedition. Tanglehair and several Dog Soldiers split from the main group and followed Dull Knife. They escaped the reservation, moving northward into Kansas. On September 17, 1878, they attacked cattle camps south of Fort Dodge, killing several settlers and driving off some cattle. On the afternoon of September 27, 1878, Colonel Lewis and his troops advanced on the tribe from the southwest. The Cheyenne bravely resisted the advancing soldiers. During the battle, Lieutenant Colonel William H. Lewis was wounded in the thigh, and 1 warrior was killed. The Army retreated, but the following day, Lewis succumbed to his wounds. On September 30th, the Cheyenne appeared in Decatur County near Oberlin, Kansas. A number of men volunteered to defend the area. One company engaged the Cheyenne in a running battle that stretched for several miles, during which 1 Cheyenne was killed, and several others were wounded. In total, 17 volunteers lost their lives. After several skirmishes with soldiers and volunteers, the Cheyenne chose to divide at Running Water. Dull Knife and his band headed toward the Red Cloud Agency. Dull Knife and his people were near Fort Robinson when they surrendered. They were imprisoned at the fort and, when they refused to return south, were starved for 8 days. Eventually, they broke out of the prison and attempted to escape across the moonlit snow. A fierce battle ensued, and more than a third of the native people, men, women, and children, were killed, including Tanglehair, chief of the Dog Soldiers. After complex negotiations, Dull Knife and the survivors were relocated to the Pine Ridge Agency in South Dakota. He later lived on a reservation in the Rosebud Valley, where he died in 1883. Meanwhile, the wolf spent the winter in the Sand Hills, where game was plentiful and there were no settlers. Later, he moved to Montana, and then to Pine Ridge, where he and his people lived peacefully until they were relocated to Lame Deer, Montana, where he spent the rest of his days. The Northern Cheyennes' escape resulted in a portion of them successfully reaching their destination, but they were eventually forced to surrender. The Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation was established in southeastern Montana, near the Black Hills, and they were never forced to return south. In the effort to subdue the Cheyenne, the U.S. government spent $1 million and lost 24 lives for every Cheyenne killed.